Good Monday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your tropical update. We have Hurricane Teddy to talk about today and Tropical Storm Beta. Yeah, we've gone Greek, our second Greek alphabet name so far this season. Before we get into things, let's start off with our tropical trivia for today. Now, hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th, a 6-month season. 2 storms are tied as the latest forming in a calendar year, both formed on December 30th. Can you name at least one of those storms? We'll give you both those names as we get towards the end of this video. Here's a look at the broad spectrum of the Atlantic basin. It's active out there, but not as active as where we were, say, last week, when at one point we had 4 or 5 named systems out there in the Atlantic at once. We still have 2 and potentially could get 3 as the remnants of what was Paulette, or post-tropical cyclone Paulette, is possibly going to be redeveloping out there way out in the eastern Atlantic. All right, it's been all about the numbers so far, right? So 23, that's the number of named storms that we've had so far this year. 27 is the most named storms on record for a season, and that was back in 2005. And we still have 69 days left in the overall hurricane season up until November 30th. So we could certainly get towards 27, if not beat it out, with that amount of time left in the overall season out there. All right, let's compare the most active season on record so far with the second most active season this year. So 2005 through September 21st through today, 17 named storms so far. 10 of those became hurricanes and half became major hurricanes. Now, this year overall, obviously, we have 23 named storms out through this afternoon, and we've had 8 hurricanes. 2 of those become major hurricanes. So even though we are beating out 2005 with the overall number of storms, we are a little bit behind in terms of the overall intensity of those storms. And the ACE value, the accumulated cyclone energy, is much, much lower this time around through September 21st than it was back in 2005. So keep that in mind. But also a good comparison here is we got to the Greek alphabet way ahead of 2005. They didn't get there with alpha until October 22nd. We got there several days ago, and we are already 2 names in with beta and alpha that already formed and fell apart. Next up is going to be gamma and delta. All right, Tropical Storm Beta out there right now. Overall, this isn't a very potent system. It is a slow mover, so that means that the rain and flooding risk, as well as an ongoing storm surge threat for the southeast Texas coastline, is going to be a problem here for the next day and a half or so. Overall, winds are not terribly strong. This is more of a water system. 45-mile-per-hour winds with gusts up to around 65. It is a slow mover, as I mentioned, moving only at 7 miles per hour, and it is expected in the next 24 hours or so to encounter a period of time where it actually may stall out. And exactly when that happens, if it's over land or if it's just offshore, will determine its intensity going forward. As we look at it here on visible satellite imagery, overall, it looks pretty impressive here on the visible presentation. However, on water vapor, where we can determine dry air and moist air, it is embedded in an overall very, very dry air mass. And every now and then, it's getting some dry air pulled into its circulation, and it kind of putters on out. Think of it as like an engine kind of stuttering a little bit. That's what's happening with this, and it hasn't been able to really maintain a lot of strength overall. It's just kind of, thrown out and thrown together here over the last couple of days. On radar imagery, yeah, there's some rainfall with it, but notice it's not widespread heavy rain. It is far-reaching because some of the most outer bands are moving onshore over Louisiana, and that's some of the areas that we could see some of the highest rainfall totals when all is said and done here as we get towards the weekend. Some areas near New Orleans could see up and over 10 inches of rainfall. In fact, the entire Louisiana and most of the Texas coastline could see over a half of a foot of rain. So here's the forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. Again, going forward for the next 24 hours or so, there's going to be a point in time where the overall steering currents are going to collapse. So it's going to pretty much sit and stall out. But then as a trough comes in from the northwest, it's going to begin to nudge it off to the north and east. And that's why you see that progression, that forward speed, picking up as we go farther out in time. And here we are by Friday morning, 8 a.m. It's over in Mississippi by that point as a remnant low. So we'll see this kind of exit and dry things out in Texas. Now, storm surge warnings are up for a good chunk of the coastline here in Texas. In some spots out by Galveston Bay up towards the Sabine River. Could see, 2 to 4 feet in terms of storm surge inundation, so could still cause some major issues out there on top of all of the major flooding. That could be a potential here. All right, so when we had Sally last week that made landfall in Florida as a Category 2 hurricane, that made it the 8th landfall in the U.S. so far. Now, with Beta going to make landfall late tonight, early Tuesday morning, that would make it 9 U.S. landfalls so far this season. That would tie us with the most on record, which was back in 1916. So Beta is going to be a record breaker, a record tie, even though it's overall not going to be that potent of a system out there. So we're going to have to keep that a careful watch on that one. Overall in the Atlantic, the other major feature is Hurricane Teddy. That was our second major hurricane of the year, and that made it up to a Category 4 status a few days ago. It is now much, much weaker. It's down to a Category 1 with winds at 90 miles per hour at the moment. And if you look here in the last couple of frames, you can see Bermuda. Thankfully, this storm is passing well to the east. However, overall effects are still being felt there with such a expansive wind field, and there's still tropical storm warnings up for the island there. A very close comparison to Paulette, which passed by and made landfall in Bermuda a week ago today as it passed right overhead and then moved off to the north and east. You can see Teddy's track and then the forecast track pretty much due north here, in fact strengthening a little bit. What helped to weaken Teddy over the past 24 to 48 hours was it actually moved over Paulette's cold wake. We've talked about this before with something called upwelling. When you have storms out in the Atlantic or any ocean basin, they whip up the ocean, they mix things up. So eventually, if there's enough mixing going on, it mixes up colder waters from a depth up to the surface and cools down effectively the ocean surface. It also draws that heat energy out to use as fuel. So you can see here on some of the anomalies, we are colder than average here in all the areas in blue, and that is the exact track of Paulette. And you can see here with Teddy, it passed over that cold wake and did weaken it down to a Category 1 hurricane. However, going forward, it's moving over very warm ocean waters, so it is expected to regenerate or re-strengthen back to a Category 2. Let's quickly look back at landfalls on Bermuda. Paulette made landfall a week ago as a Cat 2. 10th time that's ever happened since 1851 in Bermuda. And we were looking at Teddy potentially making landfall there a couple days ago. And that has obviously changed and it moved off to the east. But if it was to have made landfall, that's only happened once with 2 storms in one season. And that was in 2014 with Faye and Gonzalo. It is very ominous looking here on the visible satellite imagery. And what's happening here, it's kind of getting stretched out. There's a trough coming on in from the northwest. And what this is going to do is kind of inject a little bit of energy into the system on top of the warm sea surface temperatures. It's actually going to strengthen as it moves on off towards the north here. And we're going to see its wind field significantly expand. Here's a look at those sea surface temperatures, well into the low 80s for this high of a latitude. So that's very interesting there. But notice once it gets out of the Gulf Stream, which is supplying all this warm water in this part of the ocean, it does start to weaken as it heads towards Nova Scotia and Newfoundland in the next couple of days or so. It is going to pick up its forward speed, kind of rocketing to the north. Right now it's moving at 18 miles per hour, expected to get much, much faster than that, but strengthening as it does so. 105 miles per hour as a Category 2 before weakening and going extra tropical. But check out the wind field here. Right now, the latest observation is that you're seeing hurricane force winds extending out about 70 miles from the center, and you're seeing tropical storm force winds, which is this big yellow circle, extending out around 200 miles or so from the center. That overall is a pretty large wind field. But as we go forward, look what happens. It expands and balloons out. The tropical storm force winds are forecast to move out almost 400 miles from the center. That is a massive wind field. And as this lifts to the north, it stays quite large as it moves into Nova Scotia and Halifax area. And even some of those tropical storm force winds could make it out to near Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and maybe even portions of Cape Cod there, on top of the extremely heavy surf to the Maine coastline and often to Atlantic Canada. It's just going to be very interesting to see how it goes extratropical and how big its wind field goes. On top of everything else, Paulette, which we had talked about making landfall in Bermuda, is still out there. It's post-tropical cyclone Paulette. Kind of made its trail over the ridge and is now diving to the south and pushing to the east. 80% chance of this reacquiring tropical characteristics here in the next 2 days. Same chances within 5 days, but notice where it's moving. Where we saw a previous storm, I think that was Alpha, moved towards Portugal and is now just south of the Azores there. So very interesting there. It's the reason why it's going to keep its name, Paulette, because it still had its defined center there. It's not a brand new storm. We're not going to use a new name. We also have another tropical wave here that's dropping through the Bahamas. This one right now, extremely low chances of any development. We're at 20% within the next 5 days. But certainly this is the area, the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, the southwestern portions of the Atlantic that this time of the year gets to be a little more active. So any seed you put into a very fertile ground has the potential of developing there. So that right now has about 20% chance. All right, our answer to our tropical trivia. The latest forming storms on December 30th was Tropical Storm Zeta back in 2005 and Hurricane Alice in 1954. In fact, Hurricane Alice is the only hurricane to span 2 calendar years, and Tropical Storm Zeta is the only tropical storm to span 2 calendar years. Both obviously developed on the 30th, but overspread into January of that following year. All right, if you have a question on social media, don't be afraid to ask. You can reach out on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. We'll see you again tomorrow.